when you look at the Taiwan situation, do you think that Xi Jinping, as many people say, is determined as part of his achievements, of his accomplishments, to achieve a forcible reunification of Taiwan in the next 5-10 years?
I don't think that's their basic expectation at all. Not a forcible reunification. Taiwan is, to China, a very important matter because it is, to China, the reddest of red lines. It is about sovereignty. You can talk about economics with China, you can talk about trade, you can talk about chips, you can talk about intellectual property, but one China, that's non-negotiable because it's a matter of sovereignty. And I'm sure this applies to many other countries. But neither is it their objective to reunify Taiwan through forcible means. Certainly not in the way that has been portrayed in the media.
But it's fair to say that that's probably the only way they could reunify it. I mean, right now it does not appear that Taiwan is clamoring to become part of mainland China.
Yes, indeed so. Sentiments have shifted compared to, say, 1972 when Kissinger visited, and there was an understanding that on both sides of the straits, people accept and recognize one China. Sentiments today in Taiwan are very different from 1972, but who knows what the sentiments will be 30, 40 years from now.
So you say just kick the can down the road because it's easier than confronting it.
Well, kick the can down the road sounds like a bad thing to do. Sounds like people are not taking responsibility, but what is the alternative? Is the alternative to force a resolution that can lead to conflict and confrontation? I don't think that's any wiser, nor better. But we should engage, we should talk. And even in the recent time, I've noticed that sentiments in Taiwan have shifted after Ukraine. Yeah. There is a greater desire for stability. It's not shifted towards one China, but there is certainly a greater understanding and concern amongst the Taiwanese population about unilateral moves towards independence and what consequences that may bring to Taiwan and to the safety and security of Taiwan. And that's reflected in many of the polls.
If China were to blockade Taiwan or engage in some kind of military intervention in Taiwan, what would Singapore's position be? You have military relations with Taiwan. You do some of your training exercises there.
We do. I mean, it really depends. There are many hypothetical situations that can arise. So rather than speculate on all of these hypothetical situations, we are very clear. We uphold a one China policy. It's not just us, incidentally. US, all the ASEAN countries, many countries around the world have some version of a one China policy. So really, what triggers a blockade, what triggers provocation or escalation really depends on the context, but we are very clear about our policy on one China.
Let me ask you about the other big global crisis that you've mentioned a couple of times. When you look at the problem with Russia and Ukraine, Singapore has been very forward-leaning in condemning that, in supporting the sanctions against Russia. Where do you think this goes?
It's hard to tell. I mean, we are not monitoring this as closely because it's not within our region, but it looks like it's going to be a long haul before we can see any resolution.
And that means the world will be fragmented with Russia isolated for a long time.
Unfortunately, I think that's the very likely scenario that we have to work on.
And does that mean to you that adds to these pressures of a fragmented global economy?
It does. We are concerned that it's, as I mentioned just now, we are going to be in a world with more frictions on global flows. We are going to be in a world where there will be greater fragmentation. It's not going to be as conducive for small, open economies like us. But at the same time, I think there are silver linings even in the darkest of clouds. And we are starting off in Singapore now in a much better position than we did, say, in the 60s or 70s when we first became independent. We have more resources. We are better equipped to deal with our vulnerabilities. We have a better system in place to adapt and to adjust and to develop effective long-term policies. And we have a solid reputation as a reliable and trusted hub for the region and for the world. So we can build on all of these advantages, invest in our competitive strengths, continue to attract capital, talent, and flows into Singapore, and ensure we keep on raising the standards of living for our people.
You have a very strong security relationship with the United States, and you do a massive amount of economic business with China. If those countries were to tell you that Singapore has to choose between America and China, what would you say?
If it ever were to come to that, it's not just Singapore that's going to be affected. It's the whole world. And we better buckle our seatbelts if it were to come to that. Because this is not like in the Cold War where you had the Soviet Union and you had two systems. You can operate two systems. China's sheer size and scale today is much larger than the Soviet Union was, and it's embedded deeply in the global economy today. If countries, not just Singapore, countries everywhere have to say, look, I either choose a Chinese system or a US system for everything, not just for high tech, but for everything, I think it will be disastrous for all of us.
So you're hoping you won't have to make that choice?
I'm hoping for the good of the world that we don't have to make that choice.